So, in this age of reboots and sequels and prequels and spin offs, you know, often we see that the creator of the show, he does a great job with something, and then somebody else takes the football and runs in a completely different direction with it. Sometimes they change things that fans held dear. Sometimes they work things to be a bit more relevant or, in step with the times. And other times they just ruin the last season of Game of Thrones. So what I'm getting at here is when you have a creator and a franchise that is popular with audiences, say the creator dies, say the creator sells the property and gives it off to Netflix in the case of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Who do you side with? Do you watch the new thing and hope that it actually measures up to the original? Or do you say, George R. R. Martin had nothing to do with this, so I'm going to sit this one out? What's your gut feeling on this?
Roland?
Um, I don't know. It depends because sometimes a new face, a new director will bring the story in a totally different light and will expand upon somebody else's idea that the original creator could never have thought of. So it just depends. It depends if the person that is getting the torch actually cares about the first movie. Because if they actually care about the first movie, then they'll know what the fans love. They know what they like, what made this movie so great, and they can expand upon it. But then sometimes you get some sequels that don't do that. It's a money thing, and the production studios will say, well, let's try this director. They've had some success with this. Maybe they can add it, and then it drops the ball.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the case of something like Stan Lee, he created a bunch of these Marvel characters, all of these characters that we know we love, and we
Yeah.
saw a lot of iterations of a lot of different characters. Just in the past 30 years, 20 years, we've seen three Spider-Men, and Stan Lee, he got as many cameos as a man could have in a lifetime and after a lifetime. But he did sort of lose control over his creative vision. And George R. R. Martin has literally said, I don't want to lose control over my universe the way Stan Lee did. He lost creative control. Having said that, in a separate article, George Martin also said he'd really like to have an MCU type franchise. The only problem there, as we've seen with the Disney spots and the Marvel movies, which have all been directed by different people and acted by different people, like you can lose momentum, you can lose steam, and you can actually alienate people if you don't stay consistent with the vision.
Mm-hmm.
And something like the MCU, the whole concept is consistency across all these different stories. So, what can George Martin do to keep control over this?
Well, I mean, he has control in the sense that he didn't do kind of like Stan Lee did, where Stan Lee like was working for Marvel. I mean, he started Marvel, but like, eventually it's like Marvel is a corporate entity that he's working for, and it's like a work for hire. So anything he creates, that that work then becomes the property and of the company, and the company can choose to do with it whatever they would. Uh,
Hmm.
and that's over time exactly what they have done. They have done, whatever they want to do with the property. I mean, Stanley doesn't. I'm he will use to he gets producer credit, so like I'm sure that comes with some financial benefits. I mean, when he was alive,
To
to
his
him
family.
and now to his estate. But George R. R. Martin and even J.K. Rowling, those two authors are two examples of creators who retain control over their properties to the point that the producers or whoever's making like the live action or screen adaptations and animation or live action, they need approval and confirmation and consultation of those authors. And I
Yeah.
think in saying so, Martin was like, I don't want to be a Stan Lee who
Well,
writes work for hire.
And
know?
the thing is, the other thing that makes them a bit more of a distinction, like Stan Lee's characters were all interconnected, but J.K. Rowling, George R.R. Martin, what they did was they literally created worlds that had mythology, that had, you know, details about the entire world. And you could even say that Game of Thrones is basically an MCU type thing because you're constantly, from episode to episode, jumping to different countries, to different characters who all have backstories and different abilities. And, you know, I actually think it's redundant for him to say he'd like it to be an MCU type thing because that's sort of what the concept was from the beginning. It's a universe where everything's connected and all of these characters' stories intertwine in a significant and meaningful way.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But I would like to kind of like transition to talking about somebody who kind of maybe is a step further along than where George R. R. Martin is, right? Like he, for example, like we said, George R. R. Martin still retains the rights to the books. He still has a huge say in how they're treated on screen. I don't think he has complete control over it like J.K. Rowling does, but he still has some level of control and involvement. Whereas George Lucas is an example of a creator who created arguably the most popular franchise of all time. Like minus Solo, like every other Star Wars movie has basically made $1 billion. It is, you could say, the one franchise that probably did more for Hollywood from a technological, storytelling, and everything standpoint than any other franchise ever. I mean, and before Lord of the Rings was ever like a thing on screen. And George Lucas has expressed his disappointment over time about how what he built up and everything that he did for Star Wars, and then where Disney has taken it since he's sold Lucasfilm to Disney, he's not been very happy about it. I mean, there's a story where I mean, he said this on to a camera in interviews himself, but he offered to Disney like the scripts and ideas and plans that he had for the sequel trilogy, and Disney was like, sure, we'll take him, like Bob Iger and company, like, yeah, we'll see what we could do. Then they basically completely abandoned anything that George Lucas provided them.
You know, but this is not this is the story of every writer in Hollywood. Is, hey, I have this brilliant new idea. It's interesting, and it's something the world's never seen before. And the studio goes, yeah, you're right. What if we made it more like something that everyone's seen before? And they go,
well, in this case, they wanted it to look like,
but we'll pay you a lot of money.
Star
and they go,
Wars,
fine.
You know?
Old Star Wars worked. That was under a different model of entertainment industry. And now we're in the world of, let's sell that thing back to them again.
Yeah.
And so, you know, a perfect example is Dan Harmon, who got kicked off of his own show, Community, as the director and creator. And that was a brilliant show. Season 1, Season 2, Season 3. Season 4, he gets kicked off, and it is every other sitcom on NBC.
Yeah, and the Gaslight year.
And it's every the Gaslight year. It's every it's every romantic relationship that doesn't make any sense. That's just well, the studio thought this would work, and the plots make no sense. The characters feel different. It's every Netflix reboot. It's Arrested Development. You know, when they brought it back, it was the Pet Cemetery version of Arrested Development or Gilmore Girls or whatever else they're rebooting.
Productions know that they've tested like, oh, this works really well. We've seen that this has a lot of success. So why don't we mirror exactly like that? Because then that they like it. But that's
and then in Community's case, the fans were so distraught, the ratings plummeted, that they brought it back, and in one line of dialogue, Dan Harmon is able to say, oh yeah, people were acting weird. I guess there was a gas leak. And then it just goes right back to being the show it used to be and ends up being great again. So it was, I think audiences now are a lot more vocal about creative integrity and wanting to see something new. I don't know, like maybe the business the business argument against this is, well, we can sell this again, but here's what we're going to change about it. And yet, anybody who's creative knows, like, creative integrity and vision is everything. And it's heartbreaking to let go of that. What's interesting is that in the case of Community, in the case of Arrested Development, we can actually see that audiences respond and can tell.
Well, I think there's also been, I keep going back to the same, I don't want to sound like I'm beating the same old drum, but there's been like a lot of, you know, fan discontent, if you want to call it, backlash over how under Kathleen Kennedy's, you know, which again, George Lucas picked her out, but where the franchise has gone since he gave it, not gave it, he sold it to Disney. He made a handsome chunk of change, but so the question to me becomes, where do the loyalties of the fans lie, or where should they lie? I mean, you guys just talked about it a little bit, but if you are a fan of Star Wars, should you delineate everything that came before George Lucas sold to Disney, before the era of Disney and the George Lucas era, from everything that has happened since? Should you treat those
There are
as like
some
separate
people
things?
who don't even, you know, like, it's the first three for them, and that's it. They don't even acknowledge, you know, the original prequels. So I think you're going to find purists no matter what. But it's also important to realize that even creators can change. They can change their own minds, and if they are given the opportunity to do something differently, they do. It doesn't always work. Perfect example right now is that Powerpuff Girls is getting rebooted, and it's been rebooted once, where they replaced every single one of the veteran voice actresses and voice actors on that show who made it everything that it was. And the thematically and even the vibe you got from it was a fundamentally different show.
I didn't like it. Did not like it. The original
Yeah.
was so
There it
classic.
is.
The original was fantastic. And yet, you know, I don't know who's coming back to voice the Powerpuff Girls this time, but they brought back the Rugrats, and it's all the same people there. Not only that, but they're bringing back Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. These are both shows by Craig McCracken. But at the same time, we have those that live action version of the Powerpuff Girls that was in development and has kind of fizzled somewhere. This is paralleled by what's going on with the Avatar: The Last Airbender series, where Netflix is going to turn it into a live action series because they have the rights, and Nickelodeon is going to work with the actual creators and say, we're going to do another series like Aang, like Korra. We're going to do another Avatar series.
And those creators were originally part of the live action show, and then
But they left.
They dropped off because of apparently creative differences. So as a fan, you gotta wonder, well, do we think that those creators didn't think that the live action series was going to be faithful to the original? That's why they went and started to do their own like new animated content. So as a fan, you might like, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Avatar, but if I was, I would feel a little torn, right? Like, do I watch one or the other?
So, but here's the thing. It's like, if you like, I liked Avatar: The Last Airbender, the original series. I thought that was good. I never watched Korra. I never saw the M. Night Shyamalan version. Good. I got to give it a shot because I like the guy. But I always thought it would be cool to see a convincing live action adaptation of it. But does that mean that it's going to be shot for shot? And I'm of the opinion that it shouldn't be shot for shot. You shouldn't do, make it real.
Adaptation. So you adapt it.
Yeah.
You're not remaking it, right? I mean, Roland, where do you land on this?
It's going to be different, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, right. I mean, and then Roland, like, I'm assuming you're a bigger fan of Avatar.
Oh yeah, I love Avatar. I watched Korra. I was a big fan.
So where would you land on this subject? Because yeah, you can watch the Netflix live action. I mean, here's the thing: you don't have to choose technically, but
yeah,
being faithful to the original.
I always stand
right?
with these type of things is always give it the benefit of the doubt. Don't start talking smack until you actually watch it. Most likely it's going to be bad, but yeah, you have to at least try. Sometimes you'll get something like Aliens where it's somebody totally new. They come in and it's like, whoa, this is cool. I like this.
Yeah.
This is pretty
And
true.
that's the thing with an adaptation. I actually think it's better if it's not the original creator because, yeah, you want it to be adapted. You want to see somebody's
Yeah.
interpretation of it. Some
Yeah.
things like don't completely change. Don't give it a brand new aesthetic necessarily. Make it recognizable. Pay tribute to the original, like the Scooby Doo live action adaptations. Like those did a
Yeah.
really good job of balancing everything we've loved about Scooby Doo. You still had Frank Welker playing Scooby. You still had Matt Lillard playing Shaggy. So that was
Yeah.
still preserved. But we got to bring them to life in a completely different way that was faithful and paid tribute to it and wasn't trying to rewrite it. And that's actually what I fear happening with the same creators doing a new series with Nickelodeon. They've done 2 different Avatar stories. We're going to do a third one. That could arguably be the more of a cash grab.
I mean, and the other concern to that end I would have is maybe are they running out of ideas and are you going to get some repetition? And
Yeah.
because here's the thing, I mean, if you worked in the world of filmmaking in any aspect, right? Like all of us have touched upon that in one way or the other. And in any creative endeavor, really, it's a team effort. And I think you want to bring in a diversity of people to work on your team because they will each bring a different mindset. They'll each bring a different set of ideas, and that will like inject fresh life into something that maybe you have done like over and like you said, like we have had 2 Powerpuff Girl iterations already, or we have, or in the and more act, you were referring to Avatar. So we have had multiple Avatar series already, and these same creators are coming back. At one point, they run the risk of just basically like a cash. It will seem like a cash grab because it will seem like they're just doing the same thing again, and it's just recycling the same content. So maybe the Netflix show, because now the people working on it are not the original creators, maybe they're going to bring some new ideas to the franchise that will do it some good. Maybe we'll freshen it up. I mean, as long as they don't sham hammer it like what happened in the movie a while ago.
I
They
don't.
did
I guess how
pronounce
bad can it
Aang's
be?
name.
Huh?
Like his name is Ong in the movie. I mean, it's like the little
Oh,
thing. It's like, come on. You can't just
Yeah,
like,
you can't do that. Yeah. I mean, and some of the pronunciations was like bad. Like, I mean, who was coaching these actors about the pronunciation of the I don't know. That's an example of clearly a bad adaptation. I mean, I'm hoping that the Netflix show is a better
I
version than
mean,
that.
again, never seen it. I've only heard horrible things about it.
yeah.
But it sounds like you can't do worse, unfortunately.
So,
So maybe
what is the
that's
question?
easy.
I mean, okay, what is the answer to the question, where do fans' loyalty lie? Do you guys think it's a yes, no, or is it it depends? Like,
I'll tell you what I think it is. I think it's not one or the other. It's who's got integrity. Because sometimes creators lose their integrity. Sometimes
Uh,
ideas, sometimes they completely sell out and they say, "Oh yeah, you want to put some political cause behind a character that's been apolitical forever? Sure. How much are you going to give me for that? All right, yeah, let's do that." Or they say, "You want to add characters that make no sense? Sure, do that." The money will corrupt the franchise, the money will corrupt the creator. So whoever's going to tell me a better story, whoever's going to respect the love that I had for the original, that's who I'm going to side with.
I agree. I don't think it's a matter of like, oh, I'm gonna back up the creator, like that's my homeboy. Or, saying like, oh, this is my favorite franchise ever, nothing they can do is wrong. I think it's a matter of favoring the original story,
Yeah.
and hopefully everything else in addition to it, also favoring that story and also keeping that in mind and paying tribute, like we were saying earlier.
yeah, I
I
mean,
agree.
for me, it's all about story first, story all the time. So I'm even open to the idea of like, yeah, I like for them to maybe stay faithful to at least the spirit of the original, right? Like, if not the exact story beats or characters or even that. However, I'm open to the idea of if somebody takes a concept, an original franchise, and then completely flips it on its head. Like, for example, I watched that show on Sci-Fi, which was on for a couple of seasons, called Krypton, and it was like this origin story for the grandfather of Superman, I think it was meant to be.
Whoa.
And
Yeah.
and it
Oh, you not heard
completely
of this?
flipped like the Superman timeline upside down and changed like how you would look at what Zod's character and his family heritage was like and everything. And
That's great.
I was surprisingly entertained. It was a fantastic show. It only ran for 2 seasons, but I was like, oh,
See, but but you know what? There's a good concept
Yeah.
that has the integrity of, hey, we could tell a whole story about this world where the story of Krypton, as anybody knows it, is it was destroyed and then Superman came here. And so, yeah, there is some story there and we've never heard it. So that's good
Yeah.
imagination, I
As long as you can tell a good story, I think there's like, comics do it all the time. They'll reinvent a character and like change some things about him, and you're like, wait, but that's so central to the character. It has been for decades. But like Superman didn't fly for the first 10 years of his existence. It was just, leaping tall buildings, like things change, and I'm okay with that as long as they're telling a good story. That's what it comes down
Yeah.
to for me.
Yeah.
On the note of Superman and stuff, because we were sort of talking about this before, but like sometimes they, you will take a property and you'll pass it off to a different creator. The case I'm talking about is when they asked Christopher Nolan to write a screenplay for Man of Steel, and then
Well,
we got.
That's not exactly true. So Christopher
Okay,
Nolan read a pitch from David Goyer, and then he pitched it to Warner Brothers, and then I think he helped write the script with David Goyer, but David Goyer was like basically the main writer and then he was so I don't think Nolan wrote the script himself, but he was definitely involved in getting the project like greenlit.
Right, but the idea being that he'd been so successful with making a grounded, realistic version of Batman, could we do the same thing with Superman? And I watched it again recently, and I was like, I wanted to enjoy it, but I realized that there's a reason you can't do grounded Superman the same way you could do grounded Batman. And I think the main reason is that Batman is a human from Earth with no powers. And so everything could be plausible. Superman, and in Man of Steel, they really spend a long time, too long, I would say, on Krypton. He's an alien. And they introduce all of this like technology and all of this fantasy stuff so that by the time he is on Earth, you've had to accept so much unbelievable stuff. And it's impossible to be grounded. They also change the relationship of Clark and Lois in a real unforgivable way, in my opinion, because it's like she knows he's Superman way before she ever meets Clark Kent, and that's taking something out of not just adapting it. That's like crumpling up the original and just sort of tossing it aside. That's the whole point of the relationship.
Okay, so here's the thing. I'm a big fan of the movie, so I disagree with basically everything you said there. However,
Wonderful.
I respect your opinion, but I'll just say this again.
You know what? Let's not even call it an opinion. That's my analysis.
Okay, fair. And in my analysis, I think like as long as they tell a good story, like I said, right? Like, and I think this movie has pretty darn good story overall. And I look at it, it's like an alien first contact story. Like even though he's been living on Earth for 30 years, this is the first time the world comes to, reckon with the idea that there is such a thing as a Superman that exists among them. And in the world of this movie, like there's no such thing as later on we find out Batman is a thing and like there's people around like that.
But like here's the thing. Like everybody knows the Superman story. What I was thinking is if you're going to ground this in reality, you don't tell it the exact same way that we've always had it told. And I'm
Well, they didn't
like,
though. We got like
but
a
they did.
20-minute intro to Krypton
Let me
at the
get this out.
beginning,
Let me just get
which
this
was
out. And if we're gonna go with your idea, like this is the story of first contact with an alien, where I'd like to start is there's a kid, at his kitchen table, and his parents are watching TV, and they're just awestruck by the news. And the news on the news channel is, for the first time, we've seen this. We just get this faraway shot of Superman up in the air with his cape, and it's like now we actually have a grounded, plausible way in to the story where it's the world finding out about this guy, and then we're interested in finding out the story. But when you start with we're on Krypton, there's a lot of stuff happening, and people all have superpowers. Nothing is believable. Nothing is
well, actually on
grounded.
Krypton they don't have superpowers. It's like the Earth's sun
Right.
and the gravity
But
gives them right.
but they have the super
They have
technology
advanced
and these
technology,
interesting
right?
clothes and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, to ground it, you really need to put roots on Earth.
And to that end, I think they do. Like all the scenes with the younger Clark Kent, like him going like out of his mind because he can see like every wavelength of light, and the mom's like, just focus on my voice, like that. I thought like those scenes of young Clark, and then like the part where he's like,
Those are great.
where he's talking to like Pa Kent, and he's like, can I just continue to pretend that I'm your son? And he's like, and Kevin Costner being a great actor that he is, he's like, of course you can, and his like voice is cracking up. I'm like, they made that character and that Kent family more relatable than, and quite frankly, any other iteration of the franchise I've seen
Sure.
until that point.
There's a lot that I liked about it,
Yeah.
and those moments were fantastic. It's when we get into the more established Superman mythology that I'm like, I was not happy.
That's fair. I think there's you can only go so far, like where you're taking the material, you're taking the movie, and you're just watching it. You can only block out so much. Sometimes you just gotta be like, that's not how it is. What are you talking about? That's not what we know. And
Yeah.
it's hard to find that originality.
If
And
we go, can you go back to that shot
The one
of
where
him
he's
in the air?
right there?
If we had started with this on the news,
That'd be scary. That'd be cool.
Well, I
I'd
think
be
that's
like-
that's a directorial and editorial decision, right? Like you could
Which
have,
is
they could have
important in
easily
telling a
rejigged this
story.
movie to start with that scene, but then you wouldn't have context for why we ended up there. They'd have to kind
but
of
you'd
like
be
work their way
begging
back
for
to
it. You would be begging for it, and so you wouldn't be waiting so much for your typical arc to just go in order. With this, like you can actually. You're getting the audience to ask the question, why? Why is that? And then you can answer every single one of those whys. And then once you get enough of those whys, then you get to how. Then you can tell the story. But I felt like the actual storytelling in this was the issue with making it feel ungrounded.
Yeah, again, I think a lot of that ends up being ultimately subjective, like as all movies are. I mean, like we just talked about, some of the changes could have just been simply you go into the editing room and you cut this movie different. Some of it could be just Zack Snyder wanted this to play out more like like a sci-fi movie than he did like your traditional Superman story.
Maybe I'll recut it.
I mean, if you want to take a shot, there's a lot of people who have done similar stuff. Like people have recolored it because they thought the colors were too muted. And
It's too dark.
there's all kinds of
Yeah.
versions I've seen over the years. But I mean, look, I think it is subjective ultimately. It made like $600 million, so plenty of
Yeah,
people
because
went to
people
see
like
it.
Superman.
But it could have done better. But I think Henry Cavill's Superman as like his iteration over time has gained more popularity. And
Yeah.
honestly, it's subjective. I mean, in my
Totally.
opinion, they could wipe the slate clean of anything that is pre-existing about what we think and know about Superman and give me a completely original take. As long as they're telling a good story, I'm down.
Yeah.
So like I'm less of a I need this to somewhat resemble what the character's origins in the comics are. Like Roland, you said like you want to at least stick to the spirit of the original. I'm okay with like do whatever the hell you want to do with it. Just tell me a good story. And I think that's why I liked it, because for me at least it was a good story.
That's an interesting. I think I wish a lot more people had that kind of mindset because you do want to go in and you want to have this fresh experience. But again, and I think I even said this with when we were talking about, oh gosh, the Black Phone, or I did some review or something like that, where you have these expectations because you know so much about what the story usually is. So it's hard to just kind of go into a movie and just like shut off your brain and say, oh, this is completely new, because it's not. This is an adaptation of something.
Yeah, because it doesn't have to be a direct adaptation. They're not like picking up a comic book off the shelf and saying, turn this into a script and then into a movie. They're just saying, we took this character and now we're giving you our own iteration of what this character is all about.
Yeah.
So
the director or whoever's take on it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and again, like some people will like it, some people won't like it. Clearly, this movie did divide a lot of opinion, as it has done on this panel. I am a big fan of the film. I think it's very underrated, and to be honest, I still think to this day it is the best movie that the DCEU has produced. And I know some people might be like, that's not saying much, but I mean, they've produced over a dozen projects, and I do believe to this day, maybe Batman versus Superman: The Ultimate Cut like comes close. But in terms of purely like you go in and you want to watch a movie that you don't have to see in like a specialized cut of, this I think is in best effort of the DCU. But again, it's my opinion. Like different people will think differently about it. So yeah.
Well, tell us what you think, different people. You know, is there an answer to the question of where do your loyalties lie when it comes to franchise versus creator? You know, because creators won't be around forever. Should the content die with them? Usually the answer is no when it sells well as Superman or Spider-Man. But let's talk about it. Be our friend. Join us on everything: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube. We're around if you want to talk, so make sure you talk with us. Okay.